Hello and welcome back to my series Masters of the Chessboard, where we are going through the famous Richard Reti's book Masters of the Chessboard, looking at each game one at a time and focusing quite a bit on Reti's analysis of these games, whilst trying to incorporate some modern day theory and perhaps some engine analysis. This is game 5 of the book. It's the second game where we are looking at the famous Paul Morphy, who is playing with the black pieces, and his opponent is Theodore Lichtenhein. And the year is 1857, and it's, I believe, in the first American Chess Congress that this game takes place. And it starts off quite similar to game 4, with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4 going into a scotch, and then we had the Scotch Gambit with bishop c4, and then, just like last game, knight f6. And in this position, Reti offers a bit of analysis and a bit of advice in terms of evaluating a position. He says that the most important things in open positions is to bring all of the pieces into play as quickly as possible. He says that when the game is open, you can sometimes evaluate the position in a superficial but rapid and perhaps sufficient for practical play by simply counting the pieces that have been developed. So in this instance, white has developed the knight to f3 and the bishop to c4, and white has played the two center pawns. So white has 4 tempi, or 4 moves, whilst black has developed 2 pieces, it's 2 knights, but it's only moved 1 center pawn, so has only 3 moves. So does this mean that white already has an advantage? Well, not really, because at least for the time being, white is a pawn down, and in order to recapture it, white will have to play knight takes d4, which will be moving the same piece twice in the opening, and therefore we'll have 3 tempi versus 3 tempi, so it should even up again. So according to this rather superficial inspection, the games are about even. Now the game itself continued with e5, and here Reti is quite critical of this move, although in later theory it's one of the most played moves and most respected moves in the Scotch Gambit. But here Reti writes that in the last game we had knight g5, but in this game we have e5, and just like in the last game, we have already got another loss of time in an attempt to attack, to make an attacking move. He says that whilst the move on e5 does attack the knight, it doesn't really constitute a continuation of the development. And if black were to reply with a passive, purely defensive move, then the loss of time would perhaps be more balanced and the attack of white could perhaps be justified. However, Morphy, just as in the previous game, can respond with a developing move that controls the center and thereby obtains the advantage, which is going to be d5. Reti instead says that castling was perhaps the better move. However, it's worth pointing out that despite Reti's criticism of the move e5, e5 is the main line today. It's the main line in, I believe, the modern attack of this opening line. And actually, I've got it here. There's a book, The Scotch Gambit, by Alex Fitchbane, where he goes into quite a bit of depth, recommending e5 as a main alternative. He dedicates one chapter to castling, but quite a few chapters to pushing e5. But anyway, Morphy responds with d5, which is again the main line and recommended today and in the book as well, and it's objectively the best move. Although it perhaps is worth noting that Knight g4 and Knight e4 have been played by Magnus Carlsen quite a few times and aren't exactly losing, but d5 is certainly the main line in this opening. So bishop b5, and this is the only move. If e takes f6 and c takes d4, and you can immediately see, you can just see the advantage that black has. Black has a massive space advantage. The development's equal, but the space and central control is just dominating. Um, this is a lost game for white now, and indeed the computer's evaluation of this is -2 to black. The alternative might be to capture en passant, but then again after bishop takes d6, you can see again black has 3 pieces developed, a pawn in the center, space advantage. White has no pawns in the center, no space advantage, and just 2 pieces developed. It's not as bad as the previous variation, but it's lost for white. So bishop b5 is the only move, and is again the main line today. And now black has to do something with this knight, and again knight e4 is the most logical move. It's protected by the pawn, and it's in the middle of the board. It's centralizing the knight. So then we have knight takes d4, creating a double attack on this knight, and bishop d7. An alternative move might be bishop c5, after which you could respond. White's usual response is bishop e3, defending the knight. This line after bishop c5, bishop e3 does go quite in depth, and it's definitely playable. It's just got a lot of variations after it, and black will sometimes sacrifice a pawn to try and gain some initiative, but not always. Although it is worth noting that this variation of bishop c5 has been played by Magnus Carlsen and Wesley So, and is recommended in a few different chess books. But instead, we have probably the more natural bishop d7, defending the c6 knight, and certainly the most common move. And here Reti offers a bit of analysis again, using his method of evaluating a position. He says that if we again count the developed pieces, white has 2 pieces developed and has moved 2 center pawns, whereas black has 3 pieces developed and has moved 3 center pawns. So black is therefore 1 move ahead, and therefore ahead in development. White here takes on c6. Here Reti writes that this move constitutes another loss of time, because after b takes c6, the bishop's going to be forced to move again for the 3rd time. Now I do want to talk actually a bit about this position, because it's quite an interesting one. It's not mentioned in Reti's book, but actually in Fishbane's book he writes about how the main move now is bishop takes c6, likely to avoid having to move this bishop again. And Fishbane actually writes how after this knight takes c6 move played in this game, this opening was thought to be fairly unplayable because of this game. He says that nobody could really see where white went wrong after this knight takes c6 move. They just thought this opening was unplayable, and they couldn't really figure out why. And it was only really Morphy who understood strategy well enough at this time to really you could probably recognize why this was incorrect. But of course, Morphy, in Fishbane's words, preferred to just let his moves do the talking. The move bishop takes c6 was only played roughly 40 years after, and is very likely why Reti is perhaps more critical of the move e5, because this opening perhaps wasn't quite as mainstream then, because no one had quite figured out how to correctly play it at Reti's time of writing. So anyway, we have b takes c6, white has to retreat the bishop, bishop d3, and bishop c5. And Reti again comments that white has so far lost 2 tempi, so we should perhaps now see whether those 2 tempi appear to count. White has got 1 piece developed and has moved 2 centre pawns, which give him a total of 3 tempi, whilst black has 3 pieces developed and has moved 2 centre pawns. So therefore black is quite clearly ahead in development and ahead in time, and white's loss of tempi is quite clearly recognisable in his position. The game continued bishop takes e4, and now Morphy came and played queen h4, threatening both mate on f2 and potentially taking the bishop on e4 with check. White responded with queen e2, defending against both eventualities. D takes e4, now bishop e3. And here Reti offers a bit of advice. He says that in open positions, especially when you are behind in development, the safety of the king is the main consideration, and castling here was therefore really needed. And actually castling is the computer's #1 move as well. Morphy continues with bishop g4, attacking the queen, and white plays queen c4, counter-attacking the bishop, and also counter-attacking this pawn, which could be taken with check. Here Reti writes that this queen c4 move actually gives rise to some fairly wild combinational play, where the side which has the more pieces developed usually have more favourable prospects, as we shall certainly see in this game. Morphy takes on e3, and now Lichtenhein throws in a in-between move g3. Reti does look briefly at what happens after queen takes c6 check, which and this is quite a nice little variation Reti gives. So bishop d7, queen takes a8, king e7, g3 attacking the queen. Oh, here bishop takes f2, king takes f2, and e3 check. If white takes on e3, then black can just take the queen, and it's... Oh no, sorry, black can't just take the queen. That will be a terrible blunder. Black can first check the king, and then take the queen on a8. If instead, after e3, white plays king e1, then we have queen b4 check, c3, and then queen takes b2. And now if white chooses to be greedy and grab the rook on h8, then it's a forced mate. There's quite a few different mates here. The one which Reti gives in his book is bishop g4, and this is threatening mate on e2, and the only way to stop it is to just simply delay it by something like sacrificing your queen, and then knight d2, blocking this check on e2. But then after queen takes a1, the king's got nowhere to go. The square's covered by the pawn, this is covered by the bishop, and all of this is covered by the queen. So after knight b1, queen takes b1 is checkmate. So all of that happened after bishop takes e3 and g3, and instead of g3, if white took on c6. But instead, white played g3. Morphy moved his queen to d8, and then white recaptured the bishop on e3, f takes e3. But already it is now mate in 7, and Morphy plays the mate in 7 perfectly. I can only assume that he had already calculated this mate in 7 in his head. Plays queen d1 check, king f2, then queen f3 check. You have king g1, then bishop h3, threatening mate on g2, and this mate is very much unstoppable. White tried to take on c6 with check, but after king f8, queen takes a8 check, and king e7, queen g2 mate is unstoppable. The only way the white can even try and delay it is by just sacrificing the queen, and now it's just simply unstoppable. Any move will lead to checkmate on g2. So there we have it. That's game number 5 of the book Masters of the Chessboard, and it's quite a good game actually. Well, all the games are good really, but in particular, it's quite an interesting game, primarily because of Reti's analysis of the opening. Perhaps isn't quite accurate. It doesn't quite live up to modern day theory, and I wonder if he perhaps saw that instead of knight takes c6, bishop takes c6 is perhaps the better move, and it would certainly go along with his method of evaluating the positions in the opening, where you are trying to avoid a loss of tempo, essentially. So it's certainly an interesting position. And this game itself is obviously quite iconic, because after this game, the Scotch Gambit wasn't really played that often because of this game. No one could really see where White had went wrong. And actually, Reti's method of evaluating the position I do quite like. I've seen that method a few times now. It's obviously quite superficial. Reti says so himself. It is a superficial way. It's simply a quick way to evaluate a position, which may be sufficient for practical purposes. But I have seen it a few times now, and something I might try and use in my own games. But anyway, I'm going to leave it there for today. So thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. If there's anything you want to see or any suggestions for future videos, or how I can improve these videos, please just leave a comment and I'll be glad to take on your feedback. So with that, thank you for watching, and I will hopefully see you next time.